He thought rebuilding his father's cabin would be a simple task. But when a hidden legacy is uncovered, Caleb's world is turned upside down. What began as a personal mission to restore a home soon reveals an unfinished dream buried deep in the mountains. Can Caleb complete what his father started before it's too late? The answers lie within the walls. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode holds secrets that will blow your mind. The sun had barely kissed the mountaintops, casting a warm glow over the jagged peaks. Dew clung to the grass, shimmering like diamonds as a soft breeze swept across the valley. 10-year-old Caleb stood at the edge of the clearing, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. His eyes locked onto the remnants of the old cabin, the place where his father had once worked tirelessly, crafting every beam and stone by hand. The same cabin now stood abandoned, half collapsed, forgotten by time. His father's death 2 years ago had left a silence Caleb could never escape. The old man had been everything to him, a strong, quiet figure who had taught Caleb to live off the land, to build with his hands, and to cherish the quiet of the mountains. But now, Caleb found himself alone, the echo of his father's laughter lost to the wind. His mother had left the mountain after his father's passing, unable to bear the weight of the memories. She had tried to persuade Caleb to leave with her, but he had refused. This was home, this was where his father had lived and worked, and this is where Caleb intended to stay. The cabin, once a symbol of strength and warmth, was now a hollow shell. The roof sagged in the middle, and the walls had begun to rot from years of neglect. Caleb had spent months thinking about it, standing at the edge of the clearing and watching the ruin of his father's dreams. Today, though, was different. Today, he would begin to rebuild. He bent down and grabbed the worn hammer his father had left behind, the one that had been his constant companion in the building of their home. It was heavier than he remembered, the handle smoothed and polished from years of use, but Caleb gripped it firmly. His father had once told him that tools weren't just for work, they were a bridge between the past and the future. And Caleb needed that bridge now more than ever. With a deep breath, Caleb set to work. His small hands fumbled with the nails, but the rhythm of the task soon took over. One nail after another, the steady tapping of the hammer against the wood was the only sound that filled the air. As he worked, the weight of the silence around him didn't feel so heavy. It felt like a beginning, a chance to bring back what had been lost. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher in the sky, and Caleb didn't stop. The foundation that had once been so solid under his father's careful hands was now weak. But Caleb was determined. This was his task, his legacy, and he would see it through. The first wall went up, not perfect, but sturdy enough to stand, and for the first time in a long time, Caleb allowed himself to smile. His father would be proud. The work had just begun, but it felt like a promise being kept. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, Caleb paused to wipe the sweat from his brow. His hands were sore, his muscles tired from the long hours of labor, but he didn't mind. Every ache, every bit of exhaustion, felt like a small victory. He had started something important, and now it was his to finish. The cabin wasn't going to rebuild itself, after all. His mind drifted back to the days when his father was still alive. Caleb could remember the way his father would sit at the wooden table, pencil in hand, sketching out the plans for their cabin. His father had always been meticulous, a man who measured twice and cut once. Caleb had watched him work, fascinated by the way the old man could take rough logs and turn them into something so sturdy and beautiful. He had always assumed it was just part of being a grown-up, a skill he would learn one day. But that day had never come. His father had passed away before Caleb could fully understand the intricacies of building a house. There were so many things his father had tried to teach him: how to start a fire, how to navigate by the stars, how to make the most of what the land had to offer. But it was the building that Caleb had always admired the most. And now, he realized, he would have to learn it on his own. As Caleb knelt down to adjust one of the beams, he noticed something buried beneath the dirt, an old, weathered blueprint. His heart skipped a beat as he carefully unearthed it, dusting off the edges. It was his father's design for the cabin, the very plans that had guided them in its construction. The ink had faded with time, but the details were still clear enough for Caleb to recognize. He had seen these lines before. The measurements, the angles, these were his father's dreams etched onto paper. Caleb's fingers trembled as he unfolded the blueprint. This was more than just a map for a house. It was a testament to his father's love for him. It was a blueprint for their life, their future, and now it was his to follow. The cabin, his father's legacy, wasn't just about the walls and the roof. It was about the memories, the lessons, and the sacrifices that had gone into building it. With a deep breath, Caleb spread the blueprint out on the ground beside him. The wind ruffled the edges, but he didn't mind. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light across the valley, and Caleb felt something stir within him. He could do this. He would rebuild not just the cabin, but the connection to his father that had always felt so distant. With the blueprint as his guide, Caleb stood tall, his resolve firm. The work had only just begun, but now he had a map, a plan. And with that, Caleb knew that he wasn't just rebuilding a house, he was rebuilding a life. One nail, one beam, one moment at a time. The days blurred together as Caleb worked tirelessly, his small hands becoming calloused, his body growing leaner from the work. Every morning, the sun kissed the mountaintops, and every evening, it dipped behind them, casting long shadows over the cabin. With each passing day, Caleb rebuilt, piece by piece, the home that had once stood so proud. But as the walls of the cabin began to take shape, so did the weight of the memories that the house held. Every beam Caleb hoisted, every nail he hammered into place, seemed to echo his father's absence. The silence in the air became a constant companion, pressing down on Caleb's chest as the work grew harder. There were times when he wanted to give up, to leave the half-built structure and run, but he couldn't. He had promised his father, in the quiet of his mind, that he would finish what they had started. The walls were tall now, and as Caleb stepped back to take a look at his progress, he couldn't help but notice how much the cabin looked like it had when it was new, the way the logs fit together snugly, the clean, sturdy foundation. It was as if his father's spirit was guiding him, making sure every log was placed perfectly. Caleb could almost hear his father's voice in his mind. Every part of the cabin has to work together, like a family. But as much as the cabin was coming together, Caleb knew it was still incomplete. The roof, the heart of the house, was missing. It was the hardest part, the part his father had always handled with such precision. Caleb had seen his father up there, working alone on the highest beams, sweat dripping from his brow, balancing on the rafters, as if he was part of the sky itself. It was a task Caleb had never imagined taking on alone, but the weight of the walls now felt heavier without the roof to top them. His father had always been the protector, the builder, the one who made everything whole. Now it was up to Caleb, and the fear in his chest grew every time he looked up at the open sky. But there was no turning back now. Caleb took another deep breath, wiped his brow, and grabbed the rope to begin pulling the first beam into place. It wasn't going to be perfect. It wasn't going to be easy. But as the walls stood taller and the sky darkened with the setting sun, Caleb realized something. The house wasn't just his father's anymore. It was his creation, his labor, and his love. With that realization, the weight of the walls felt a little lighter. Caleb had always believed that the hardest part of rebuilding the cabin would be the physical work, the lifting, the hammering, the cutting. But as the roof slowly began to take shape, he realized the hardest part wasn't the building. It was the memories that were woven into the walls, the memories of his father. Every creak of the wood, every notch cut into the beams, reminded him of the man who had once filled this space with laughter, with love, with life. It wasn't just the cabin Caleb was rebuilding, it was his relationship with the memory of his father. And as the days passed, Caleb began to understand something that had eluded him for years. His father hadn't just built the cabin with wood and nails, he had built it with his heart. Every nail had been hammered with a purpose, every beam placed with intention. This cabin wasn't just a structure, it was a symbol of his father's love, his sacrifice, and his hopes for Caleb's future. One afternoon, as Caleb worked on securing the final beams, he found something hidden beneath the floorboards, an old tool chest. The chest was weathered and dusty, but it was unmistakable. His father had always kept it close, using it to store the most important tools and materials. Caleb had seen his father's hands, weathered from years of work, reach for this chest time and again, always with a sense of reverence. It was the tool chest that his father had used to teach him how to fix things, how to build, how to create. Caleb's heart pounded as he opened the chest, half expecting to find nothing but rusted metal and broken parts. But instead, inside was something far more precious. It was a letter, folded and yellowed with age. Caleb recognized his father's handwriting immediately, the familiar loops and curves of the letters. The letter was addressed to him. "Caleb," it began, "if you're reading this, I know you've come back to rebuild what we started. I always believe that a man's true strength isn't in what he can build with his hands, but in what he can build with his heart. The cabin we've built together will always stand as a testament to that strength. But there's something else you need to know." Caleb's hands shook as he unfolded the letter. As he read, he felt the weight of his father's words, settled deep within him. The letter spoke of lessons his father had hoped to pass on, of dreams for Caleb's future, of the bond they shared. But there was one line that stood out to Caleb above all others. This cabin was never meant to be finished by just one person. It's yours now, but it's also ours, always. Tears welled in Caleb's eyes as he finished reading. His father had always known, even before he passed, that Caleb would come back here, that Caleb would rebuild not just the house, but the legacy his father had left behind. And with that, Caleb knew the work wasn't just about wood and nails. It was about remembering, about honoring, and about carrying forward a legacy built on love. The cabin stood silent as Caleb surveyed the structure, the sky above growing darker with the approach of evening. The framework of the roof was nearly complete, the wooden beams interlocking perfectly, just as his father had taught him. But even as the bones of the cabin grew, sturdier with each passing day, Caleb still felt the absence of the one person who had always known exactly how to make it stand tall. With every piece of wood Caleb laid, he found himself thinking of the man who had built this place, who had taught him everything he knew. His hands, once steady and sure, now trembled as they worked. Every swing of the hammer, every cut of the saw, felt like a call to a memory that was slowly slipping through his fingers. He had been so sure, so determined when he first started. But now, doubt began to creep into his heart. Was he doing it right? Could he really finish this cabin? Finish what his father had started, without him? But Caleb could not allow himself the luxury of doubt. His father's voice, soft but firm, echoed in his mind. "A man builds his house with more than his hands. He builds it with his heart, his sweat, his patience." The words were simple, yet they held so much weight. Caleb had always assumed that his father had the magic, touch, the gift of knowing exactly how to make the cabin stand strong. But now, standing in the middle of the half-built walls, Caleb understood. His father hadn't built it with magic. He had built it with belief. Belief in himself, in the work, and in the legacy he was creating. And that belief was now Caleb's to carry. He wasn't just rebuilding a house, he was rebuilding his father's spirit within himself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb worked late into the night. His body ached, and his hands were blistered, but he didn't stop. With every swing of the hammer, he felt himself becoming more in tune with the task at hand. He was no longer a boy trying to recreate his father's work. He was a young man, carving out his own place in the world, building the future with his own hands. When he finally stepped back to look at the cabin at the end of the day, he saw not just a structure, but a home that had been rebuilt, piece by piece, from the foundation to the roof. And for the first time, Caleb felt a quiet, deep pride in his work. His father would never return, but he had never truly left. Caleb could feel him in every corner of the cabin, in the wood beneath his fingers, in the very air around him. The first signs of autumn had begun to touch the mountain, the leaves turning gold, the air crisp and cool. Caleb stood on the edge of the property, watching as the wind stirred the branches of the trees. The cabin, almost finished now, stood proudly behind him, a testament to his dedication and hard work. The roof was solid, the walls strong, and the beams were in place. The final piece was all that remained, the last beam to lay across the top. But that final beam was more than just a piece of wood. It was the culmination of everything Caleb had worked for. It was a symbol of his journey, of the years of struggle, loss, and quiet determination. For so long, the cabin had been just an unfinished dream, a half-formed idea his father had started. But now, it was his dream too. The last beam lay waiting, resting on the ground beside him, ready to be hoisted into place. Caleb paused, his hands cold as he reached down to touch it. He could feel the weight of it, not just physically, but emotionally. It was the last piece of a long and painful puzzle, a puzzle that had taken years to complete, and as his fingers brushed against the rough wood, he remembered his father's hands. He remembered the way his father had always known what to do, how to make everything fit together. Caleb lifted the beam slowly, using all his strength to guide it into place. It was heavy, but not as heavy as the weight that had been on his shoulders for so long. The task of rebuilding his father's cabin had been daunting, but it had also been his way of finding peace. With each swing of the hammer, each piece of wood he placed, he had laid down a piece of his grief, a piece of his doubt, and a piece of his love for the man who had given him everything. As he placed the beam on its final resting place, Caleb felt a sense of completion wash over him. The cabin was no longer a shell, no longer just an unfinished structure. It was whole, just as he was. And for the first time since his father had passed, Caleb felt the weight of the mountain not as a burden, but as a gift. With the final beam in place, Caleb stood back and surveyed his work. The cabin stood tall and proud, a symbol of resilience and love. He had rebuilt it for his father, yes. But in doing so, he had also rebuilt himself. And that, Caleb knew, was the most important thing of all. The air was cooler now, and the mountain winds whispered through the trees, carrying with them the scent of pine and earth. Caleb stood at the doorframe of the cabin, staring out at the valley below. The work was almost done. The cabin was standing tall, its walls solid, its roof sturdy. But as he looked out at the vast expanse of the wilderness, Caleb realized that something still felt incomplete. The cabin had always been a place of shelter, a symbol of his father's hard work and perseverance. It had always been a place to return to, a place to feel safe. But now that it was finished, it was as if a part of Caleb had been left behind. He had poured every ounce of himself into this cabin, his sweat, his energy, his grief. But there was still something missing. His father's presence, the sound of his voice, the warmth of his embrace, it was all gone. And the house, no matter how beautiful it was, couldn't bring it back. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees, and Caleb closed his eyes, letting the sound of nature wash over him. He thought back to the days when his father would sit on the porch, his weathered hands resting on his knees, watching the sunset as if he could see something Caleb couldn't. Those quiet moments, when the world seemed to slow down, were the ones Caleb had taken for granted. But now, as he stood there, alone, the silence felt different. It wasn't the empty silence of loss. It was the quiet of completion, of work well done. For so long, the cabin had felt like a reminder of what had been lost. But now, it felt like something new, a new beginning, not just for the house, but for Caleb himself. With a deep breath, he stepped inside, his boots thudding softly against the wooden floor. He ran his fingers along the beams, the smooth wood warm beneath his touch. The walls, once bare and forgotten, now held life. The cabin had become more than just a building. It had become a part of him. And just like that, Caleb realized something. This wasn't just his father's cabin anymore. It was his too. He had made it his own. The first crack of dawn would soon fill the cabin with light. But for now, it was just Caleb and the stillness of the mountain. And in that silence, he found something he had been searching for, a sense of peace. His father would never come back, but in this space, Caleb had learned to live without him, to carry him with him in every corner of the cabin. And that was enough. The wind had calmed by the time Caleb finished the last touches on the cabin. He stood on the porch, wiping the dirt and sweat from his brow, taking in the sight of the structure. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden glow across the valley. It was a peaceful evening, but as Caleb stood there, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The sound of footsteps on the gravel path startled him. He turned to see two figures approaching, a man and a woman, both carrying packs and walking with purpose. Caleb didn't recognize them, but the look in their eyes suggested they had come for something important. As they reached the porch, the man spoke first, his voice low but kind. "We didn't expect to find anyone up here," he said, glancing at the cabin. "We've been hiking these trails for years, but I don't think we've ever seen a cabin like this. It's beautiful." Caleb nodded, though he wasn't sure what to say. He had never been good at talking to strangers. "It's been a long time coming," he replied. "My father built it, and I've been fixing it up since he passed." The woman's eyes softened as she looked at Caleb. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said gently. "But it looks like you've done something incredible here. This place is something special." Caleb looked at the cabin, his heart swelling with pride. "It's been a lot of work," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I think he would have been proud." The man smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "We're not just here for the cabin," he said. "We're actually looking for something. A piece of land that used to belong to your father. Do you know anything about it?" Caleb felt a sudden pang in his chest. His father had never spoken much about land or property. The mountain had always been their home, but Caleb hadn't heard anything about someone seeking land. "What do you mean?" Caleb asked, confusion clouding his thoughts. The woman explained, her voice calm and steady. "Your father had an agreement with a group of people, some land that was passed down to him. We were told it's part of a larger project, something that was supposed to be finished long ago. But when he passed, the deal was left hanging. We were hoping you could help us finish it." Caleb's mind raced as he processed the words. There was so much he didn't know, so much about his father's past that had remained hidden. But standing there, on the porch of the cabin he had rebuilt with his own hands, Caleb felt something stir inside him. This was his father's legacy, and now it was his responsibility. "I'll help," Caleb said, his voice firm. "Whatever it takes." Caleb had always thought he knew everything about his father, or at least enough to get by. The man had been his rock, teaching him how to build, how to survive in the wilderness, how to respect the earth. Their cabin, humble as it was, had been a place of stability, a beacon of their shared life. But as the man and woman spoke to him, laying out papers and maps before him, it became painfully clear how little Caleb truly understood. The strangers who had identified themselves as friends of his father seemed to carry an air of urgency, of expectation, like they were waiting for Caleb to be something he didn't even know he was capable of. They spoke of a land deal his father had been involved in, an agreement that had been left unfinished when his father passed away. According to the strangers, his father had once planned to develop a piece of land deep in the mountains into something far greater than the cabin Caleb had rebuilt. "Your father," the man, whose name was John, explained, "wasn't just a builder. He had big plans. He saw potential in the land beyond the cabin. He envisioned a place of refuge, a retreat, a sanctuary for those in need." Caleb's head spun as he listened. He had known that his father had always dreamed of doing something more, but he never imagined this. The land that surrounded their home, the very mountains Caleb had grown up in, held the key to a dream his father had worked toward in silence. The woman, Sarah, began unfolding a large, yellowed map, pointing to a location Caleb had never seen before. It was deep in the heart of the mountain range, a place his father had traveled to many times, though Caleb had never accompanied him. It was there, on this land, where his father had planned to build a facility, a retreat for people seeking peace and healing, far from the chaos of the world. The vision was larger than Caleb had ever imagined, and now it was clear. This land, this dream, had been left unfinished. And it was now Caleb's responsibility to finish it. "Your father began the groundwork, Caleb. He had already mapped out the foundation of several structures, cleared areas for gardens and communal spaces, and even started negotiations with several interested parties. But after he passed," John's voice faltered. "The project stopped. The land fell silent. The vision was left incomplete." Caleb stared at the maps, at the intricate lines his father had drawn with such care, marking out spaces for future buildings, pathways, and green spaces. It was a beautiful vision, a project that could truly change lives, that could give the people who needed it most a place of hope. And yet, there was so much that Caleb didn't know, so many gaps in the story. His father had kept all of this hidden from him, and the weight of it hung heavily around his shoulders. But there was no escaping it now. His father's dream was his legacy, and Caleb realized, with an almost crushing weight, that he was now the one tasked with bringing it to life. Caleb's eyes met Sarah's. "Why didn't he tell me about this?" he asked, the frustration clear in his voice. "Why didn't he share this with me? I could have helped him." Sarah's eyes softened. "Your father had his reasons," she said gently. "He wanted you to be a part of it, Caleb, but he also didn't want to burden you with something so grand. He hoped you'd be ready to take it on when the time was right." John nodded, his gaze steady. "He knew you had the heart for it. And now that you've rebuilt the cabin, you've proven that you have the strength to see this through." Caleb felt a knot form in his stomach. He hadn't been prepared for this, hadn't known he'd ever have to take on such a monumental task. But looking at the land, the vision, and the unfinished foundation of his father's dream, Caleb felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just rebuilding a cabin anymore. He was rebuilding a future, one that was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. "I'll do it," Caleb said, his voice firm but uncertain. "I'll finish what he started." Sarah smiled, a look of relief and pride crossing her face. "We knew you would." That evening, as Caleb stood outside the cabin, staring at the mountains in the distance, he realized just how much this land meant to him. It wasn't just about the cabin, it was about his father's legacy, and it was about the family he had yet to build, the people he hoped to bring to this mountain. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, and Caleb wasn't sure he was ready, but he knew that this was the moment he had been waiting for. This was his chance to honor his father's memory in a way that would make the world better. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He was the man who would carry the dream forward. The following days were a whirlwind. Caleb spent hours poring over the papers and maps his father had left behind, trying to make sense of it all. He would spend nights studying the blueprints, marking out where the buildings would go, where the paths would lead, and where the gardens would grow. The plans seemed so grand, so elaborate, and Caleb could hardly fathom that his father had envisioned all of it. John and Sarah returned often, guiding Caleb through the details, showing him the land itself, leading him to places his father had once scouted. The journey to the site was grueling, with the path growing steeper and more treacherous the farther they went. But as Caleb climbed higher into the mountain range, he felt something stir within him, a connection to his father, a connection to the land itself. The closer they got to the site, the more Caleb understood why his father had chosen this place. The first time they reached the clearing, Caleb could hardly believe his eyes. The ground had been cleared, but the work had stopped abruptly. Stone foundations had been laid, outlines of buildings etched into the earth, and wooden beams sat scattered in the dirt, half finished. It was a place that held both promise and abandonment. Abandonment, dream half formed. "This is it," John said, motioning toward the clearing. "This is where your father's vision will come to life." Caleb surveyed the area, his heart pounding in his chest. His father's dream was real. It wasn't just an idea on paper, it was here, in front of him, waiting to be brought back to life. But the weight of the task pressed on him. This wasn't just a cabin anymore. It was a community, a sanctuary for the lost and the broken. Caleb could feel the enormity of it all, but he also felt a sense of calm. This was his purpose now. He wasn't just a boy rebuilding a house. He was a man rebuilding a future. Over the next few days, Caleb began to envision what his father had seen all those years ago. He saw the cabins nestled along the hillside, the paths winding between the trees, the people who would come here to heal. This was no longer just about the past. It was about the future, about the legacy his father had left behind, and Caleb knew that he was the one who would carry it forward. As the sun set over the mountain, Caleb stood at the edge of the clearing, looking out at the land. The weight of the future rested on his shoulders, but for the first time, he didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt ready. The mountain, the cabin, and the vision were all part of his story now. It was up to him to finish it. "I'll make you proud, Pa," Caleb whispered to the wind. "I'll finish what you started."